Special Study Committee on Development Authorities and Downtown Development Authorities. I'm Max Burns. I have the privilege of chairing the committee. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have a number of members of the committee in transit, and they'll be joining us momentarily. But I would like to welcome you. Thank you for coming out this morning. It's kind of a dreary, rainy, challenging commute morning, but appreciate you being here. We're going to begin with an invocation. I'm going to ask Senator Gooch if he would offer an invocation.
Good morning. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you this morning blessed, Lord, as a state, Lord, and as a nation. We thank you, Lord, for our freedom, Lord, and our republic that we live in. God, we pray for our leaders in Washington and here in Georgia as well. God, we pray this morning for former First Lady Sandra Dill, and God, we pray for her family that you'll be with them and comfort them through their days of mourning. And God, we thank you for their service. We thank you for the Dill family, Lord. And Lord, be with us as we make decisions today that'll be in your favor, God. In these names we pray. Amen. Thank you.
I'd like to add my sincere condolences to Nathan Dill and his family in the passing of Sandra. She was a wonderful lady and a tremendous advocate for Georgia and a tremendous advocate for education. And we're at a great loss as a state, and we wish Governor Dill strength and peace as he faces challenging days. This morning, the committee will begin to receive information and testimony from individuals who can shed light on our development authorities and our downtown development authorities. We have a very significant agenda, and we're going to have to shift around a little bit because of just the issues with traffic out there. But I'm going to ask if Dan McRae, Dan, are you available? I'm going to ask Mr. Dan McRae from Seaforth Shaw. Dan, as a knowledgeable and capable individual who works with a large number of development authorities, I'm going to allow him to introduce himself and then to share his insights into the challenges that Georgia faces and our development authorities faces. Thank you for being with us, Mr. McRae.
Yes, you have this right here.
I'm getting a quick technology course even as we speak. So I am Dan McRae. I'm just a lawyer, but I am the happiest lawyer you know, because I've been lucky enough to do the legal side of economic development. Next year will be 50 years. So I'd never thought I'd be doing it, but here I am. And I appreciate our good legislators and the good work the General Assembly has done and the governor. Georgia is just superlative, and that doesn't happen by accident. Our community pulling together has all done a good job, and if I'd contribute anything this morning, I'm glad to do it. As I mentioned, I have been doing this long enough that I once did a presentation on an overhead projector. Does anybody know what an overhead projector is? But I do have a PowerPoint because these days, you know, you have to. And I started with a picture of the Capitol. Oh, I'm supposed to be doing that, aren't I? Hey, there we go.
The committee should have copies of the McRae's presentation in your folder, and then it's also available on the screen.
I didn't want to peak too soon, so I actually prepared this at 6 a.m. this morning. Thank you, Ashley, for working with me on that. So what I'm going to do is to remind us all of some things that we already know, and then point out some things that you may not know that are relevant to the work of this committee. You know, economic development today is like water to the fish. We all know how important it is and how much it has contributed to Georgia's success. But in 1968, which was the year that I graduated from Emory College, economic development became a public purpose, and it was not before then. And that was accomplished by amending the Georgia Constitution, something that we love to do. And you have some text on the screen from the 1968 Constitutional Amendment. But basically, it says that the promotion of trade, commerce, industry, and employment opportunities is a public purpose, and therefore the General Assembly is authorized to create or authorize a creation of development authorities. So it all comes back to that constitutional amendment that recognize economic development as a public purpose and authorize development authorities. Something important structurally is how this works. It all flows back to the Constitution. Citywide authorities, countywide authorities, joint authorities, downtown development authorities.
You're good.
Okay. They are all creatures of the Constitution. The General Assembly has breathed life into them by passing the Development Authorities Law and the Downtown Development Authorities Law. You see at the bottom, development authorities, and they got the full panoply of powers, trade, commerce, industry, and employment opportunities throughout their jurisdiction. A level up, you have downtown development authorities that they draw on the same constitutional powers, but they're limited to revitalization and redevelopment, number one, in the central business district, number two. But the General Assembly thoughtfully threw in some extra powers there that you see on the right. You see off to the side, cities and counties. Cities and counties didn't get any of that good economic development stuff, but they're more than bystanders. They are stakeholders. So our development authorities work together for the common good with the local governments. Incentives, I've heard that word before. And this goes back to 1997 Attorney General opinion. And there's lots of these things, we know something and forget it, and the Attorney General rules again, and there you go. But this is an important one because it says, in exchange for something being provided by the public sector has to get in return from the private sector the fair market value or other substantial benefit. So you have to at least get equal. And this isn't about but for any of this. It's about gifts and gratuities. That's the law in Georgia. Another very important phrase in this legal opinion, if you get on Westlaw or something in Georgia and search governmental mission, you'll get a lot of hits because that's how it works. You're not created as a public body and you go charge off and do anything that you want to, like a natural person can. You have the powers that you were given. You were given a governmental mission. The governmental mission of development authorities is economic development, like the governmental mission of a city or a county is local government. Again, a lot of thought, and as I say, I have been doing it a long time. In the distant past, 50 years ago, particularly in what's now McRae Helena, I never thought that would happen, that the two cities would consolidate. We were just so glad to see any investment, any industry, that basically everybody's welcome. Today in 2022, there is a great deal of process to this by development authorities and DDAs in Metro Atlanta, but not just in Metro Atlanta, all around the state. There are two studies that are commonly used with economic development projects to calculate what the project and the incentives are giving back to the community. The first is LOCI, which stands for local impact. That calculates the present value of the net benefit to the public sector of a project after, in this case, let's say property tax savings, property tax abatement. And that is either a positive number or it's not a positive number. M-Plan is a more sophisticated, but in a lot of ways less useful study mechanism. It calculates economic impact at a higher level, but doesn't give attention to the deductive effect of the incentives that go into it. So it's very, very common for development authorities either to mandate LOCI and have the project or developer pay for it, or they do it themselves, or you can get a license and you, the development authority, can do it yourself. The Atlanta and Fulton development authorities use M-Plan. And again, their people are trained in how to use it. A little bit more about M-Plan, the industry standard. And, these are some real live examples I'm giving you here of the report that is made. What is the information made available to the public and to the authority board members about what the project means to the public economically. Bond process. Bonds are very important in Georgia. There are about 14 other states that do incentives transactions the way that we do. It's not just Georgia. And I don't need to walk you through the entire process, but the bond process is there. And the important point for purposes of this morning is that There are two public meetings of the authority that take place after notice and that are public. And there are two newspaper ads that are run of the pending bond deal to give notice to the public of the transaction. And kind of in getting right down to it, as matters have evolved with development authorities seeking best practices and being responsive, all of our authorities, there may be one or two, there's some 159 counties and a lot of cities, so you could probably find one somewhere, but most authorities, virtually all authorities, have a process of some kind. And I give you an example here of the incentives process when a prospect is asking for incentives from a county development authority in Metro Atlanta. This is a well-developed process, and I think it illustrates one thing. I mean, the key to having what's the most important thing in a partnership? And y'all ever invested with somebody, been partners in a service partnership? I tell you, it's not the partnership agreement. It's picking good partners. Picking good partners. If you want to have a good partnership, whether it's a public-private partnership or a public-public partnership, everybody involved needs to be a good partner. And every project needs something to assure the return to the public sector of the public benefit that has been bargained for. You can't make a gift or a gratuity, but you can make a bargain. You always want to make a good bargain. But as Samuel Goldwyn said one time, a verbal contract isn't worth the paper it's written on. So you need a deal document. It has to spell out what you're receiving, and there has to be remedies in favor of the public body if you don't receive what you bargained for. I thought I had a slide in here. I guess I didn't. It was too early. Several years ago, and I think it's been 7 years ago now, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, GASB, issued something called GASB 77, which required the disclosure in the financial statements of local governments and public bodies of abatement, not just their abatement, but the impact on them of the abatement of other public bodies. So as you can imagine, all across the country, there was a great hue and cry, like Chicken Little, the sky is falling, but the sky did not fall. That turned out to be a non-event, particularly in communities that have good processes, like the example that I gave you. All the stakeholders had that information. And today, you can go to a city or a county's consolidated financial statements and look, and you'll find that information. And for that matter, the information is available at any time because a running total is kept of it. Sometimes that total is kept by the development authorities, and sometimes it's kept by the assessors. So even though I forgot a slide, that's really all I've got in the way of PowerPoints, thankfully. But if anybody has questions, I'd be more than happy to stand here and do my best to answer them.
Questions from the committee? Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dan, for being here. I know you have done business for us in my area and several others probably here too, and always superlative.
Thank you.
You and some others too, and I'm grateful for that. And you say you've been doing this for 50 years?
Believe it or not, I must have started when I was 2.
I was going to say that, but in that 50 years, you've seen Georgia become a place to do business, as we've all like to report.
Number one.
And would you say that part of the current process is how we got there?
Well, I'm going to spare y'all. Another thing I should mention is that for many years, Development Authority board members have been mandated to take training.
Yes.
So that goes on, and the contents of the training changes, not just over time, but from year to year. And I actually had sponsored a conference this week on 2 days, half days, all about that. And I thought about just sending Ashley my PowerPoints from that, but I thought I might get thrown out if I did. But to answer your question, the Georgia could not do what we have done. And we couldn't, there's not one thing that accounts for it all. There's no silver bullet. We've had Great leadership in the state, great work by the General Assembly, hardworking economic developers on the state level and the community level and the statewide private sector economic developers. But under our legal system, if you want to pass through grants, if you want to do property tax abatement, if you want to have people who are responsible for knowing the local situation, what will work locally and what will not work locally. In Georgia, you got to have a development authority. If there's no development authority, we're out of business. And again, I'll show you some more age. You remember in 1995, and I think Michael Biles was Attorney General then, we had the famous Attorney General opinion about forgivable loans. It has all happened before and it will all happen again. So this was not new news that you can't give stuff away. But the Attorney General ruled that a loan program, a forgivable loan program, which is really a grant program that was being administered, was unconstitutional. And what do you think the response was? Chicken Little running around saying, oh my God, South Carolina is going to get all the projects. It was South Carolina then. But the solution to that is the mechanism that we have come up with to use development authorities as the interface between the public sector and the private sector. Remember that Constitution thing? Don't forget the Constitution. Development authorities can do things that local governments with taxing powers cannot do. And we have to solve that Attorney General issue. Came forth the REBA grant program and the One Georgia grant program. And that the state government uses local authorities to do that because that's the way it has to be in Georgia.
A follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. And of course, the local authorities are appointed by the county or city government.
Yes, sir.
So they are connected in that regard.
There's the power of appointment and there's also the power of the purse.
Yeah. Well, you brought up the classes that are required, and I think that's a great thing. And no offense to our local elected officials, but many of those and the people who are appointed have no clue on how the economy or economic development scenario works. So the classes are good, but still the years of experience that hopefully some of them get out of this is probably even more crucial.
One of the roles that the Development Authority board members serve is subject matter expert. This, when I was growing up, it was show dirt and have a meeting whenever somebody wanted to have a bond issued. And a lot of times you didn't own the dirt. If you did, it wasn't developed. You can't go very far with that. Today, economic development, I've spent my career doing the legal side of economic development. So there's a legal side to this. There's also a financial side, an accounting side, an investment banker side, and it's a lot. And nobody expects a board member. You might be lucky and get one of those on the board, or the appointing body might deliberate and make some very good appointments so that you have basically in-house expertise in matters that usually take a graduate degree. But what you are going to have, which is absolutely invaluable over time with your authority board members, is subject matter expertise, knowing the art of the deal, knowing what works locally, knowing what to bring up as a project and what to forget, because no matter how good it is, it's not going to work locally. And the board members are the connection between the authority and the public. And I've seen that work, and God bless them. It's a volunteer job, and we require the training after they were appointed, because if they were trained before, they wouldn't take the appointment.
Thank you for all you do
Yes,
for all of us.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman. First, I'd like to acknowledge that all members of the committee are present now, and that we also have Senator Beach joining us, as well as Chairman Oliver from the House joining us. We appreciate them, and I'm going to recognize Senator Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to follow up on Chairman Mullis's comments about us being the #1 state to do business. And I would tell you, when you really look at the reason we are successful is because of the tools that we have in our toolbox with the development authorities. I mean, we're competing against Texas and Florida, who have these huge hundreds of millions of dollars in these enterprise funds that we don't have, and they can do deals that we can't do. And we have to go through our development authority. So I want you all to think about that. And I want to just give you one quick example. We have a development that in my district, my area, called Avalon. I don't know if y'all know about that. It's a mixed use 100-acre development. And it was during a recession, and it was about to fall apart, and the Fulton County Development Authority stepped in. The development has been a huge success, but not only that area, but the halo effect from Avalon down the street, across the street, the city of Alpharetta redid their downtown, and they didn't partake in any kind of development authority dollars. So the sales tax and the economic boom from that, the catalyst from that development was unbelievable. So you got to look at the big picture when we're looking at these deals, and the development authority is a good vehicle to get these things done and grow economic development. I've been doing economic development when I was CEO of the chamber for 15 years, and I know what it's like to compete with, Charlotte and, Florida and Texas and so on. So we use our development authority to be competitive and get us in the game. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me just interject a question or two. Go back to your conversation about loci versus in-plan.
Right.
And differentiate between those two for me and make sure I understand the difference. And the question is, do all development authorities use one or the other? And are they required to, or is it one just you mentioned the fact a good process? How can Georgia ensure that development authorities are following good process?
Well, as Senator Mullis mentioned, they're accountable to those who appointed them, and they're also accountable to the public in terms of getting public feedback. But in terms of a particular study tool being mandated, it's not. And what this is not just part of best processes, it's part of best practices. And authority board members are responding, and this isn't new news. I mean, it's been going on for quite a while. I'm dating myself. When Georgia Tech first created loci, which is an algorithm. It was presented for the first time to the Macon-Bibb Industrial Authority, and I was there. And this has been 20 or 25 years ago. So the use of that tool has grown exponentially over that time. I don't know how many authorities are using it, but it's more than a majority, and it may be a vast majority of authorities because it's not expensive and you can do it yourself. I think does a better job than in-plan if you're concerned about the local impact, which is the name of a particular project, because it takes revenue inputs and revenue deducts on the local level and puts them in the acronym, the algorithm, so that you get an answer that is specific to your community, and it's a net benefit. It's not the gross benefit. In-plan, it studies economic impact. In-plan probably does a better job of capturing the halo effect. So like Avalon, for example, was a big deal where it was, and there was property tax abatement there, but it was also a big deal in surrounding areas that got no abatement that paid increased taxes because of the increase in values and because of new investment coming there. So there's a place for in-plan, but it takes its data from I can't remember which federal agency does it, but it's on the federal level, and it doesn't drill down to the city level or the county level. And because of that, they're both useful in their way, but I think that local people place more confidence in loci because they're local and it's local.
Do you feel there's a preference for one over the other, or a benefit for one over the other?
I can only answer that question one way. If it was me, I'd use loci.
Okay. Thank you for your input. Let's touch a minute on training. And I am aware that our development authorities have training available, and I'm not convinced there's a requirement, but an expectation at least that training occurs. It's required. Thank you. And again, how is that training documented? Can you answer that, or is that
Department of Community Affairs?
DCA? Yeah, we heard from them last time, and I think, and I apologize, I was not physically in the room because I had to deal with a medical challenge. But if I understood that input correctly, that's self-reported training. Is that correct?
It's reported by the trainer. Let me take that back. The trainer keeps records and certifies the attendance. That goes to the development authority. The development authority is legally required to do an annual report to the Department of Community Affairs. Part of that report is to report by director whether or not that director has received his or her training.
And again, from my perspective, my final question is, expand a little bit on GASB 77 and the expectations or requirements for that.
I'll do my best. I'm not an accountant.
Nor I.
Well, I could get up on my soapbox here, but I'll spare you that. But just like for private businesses, you have the Financial Accounting Standards Board, FASB.
Right.
We've all heard FASB 98 and FASB 13. Those have to do with off-balance sheet leases. There is the equivalent thing for public bodies called the Government Accounting Standards Board. It's a 5-person body, I think, private sector. They meet in Washington. But if a government body wants its auditors to give its financial statements a clean opinion, it has to be GASB compliant. And the new GASB rule required the quantification of the impact on the revenues of the body whose accounting financial statements it was, of not just abatements they have granted, but of abatements granted by other public bodies. So the way that you get that information is you either go to the public body, ask your development authority what you've done or are doing, because you can get it currently, or you go to the tax assessors. In Cobb County, for example, the assessors keep the records, and they're a really good bunch of assessors and a great chief appraiser. So the data is mandated to be acquired. It is acquired. It's added to the financial statements. I believe it's footnoted. But you could go to the Carl Vinson Institute's data bank of financial statements for just about anybody and get it and go looking, and you'd find that data.
Okay, thank you. Chair recognizes Chairman Alden.
Thank you, sir. Very much appreciate your time, your reputation and professionalism, and this is
Thank you.
very well known. I'm looking at this chart that you prepared, and I'm trying to ask understand a little bit more about the process. This is,
Excuse me, what does it say at the top of the page?
it says public meetings of authority after notice to public. I'm trying to understand what of this is statutory and what the time limits are. For instance, I know the bond validation hearing is required statutorily. How much notice between the publication notice and the bond hearing is there?
Bond hearing has to take place within 20 days of the approval of the bond resolution and filing with the judge. So the two ads run within that time period.
20 days. The filing with the Superior Court, are all of the details of the financial deal incorporated in that filing, or only the bond portion of the financial deal?
I don't know what other lawyers do, but what I have always done is we take that MOU that I mentioned, which is the deal document, and it's got everything in it. And that's part of the bond documents. And it's also mentioned, we list the documents in the newspaper ad. So you know there is one.
I know there's a newspaper. Is the MOU statutorily required as part of the public notice or not?
You know, I'm gonna have to tell you another war story. So I did the first MOU in the state of Georgia, and I don't know how long ago that was, but it was for a project in Dublin, and I think it was the Best Buy project. And the company was represented by a consultant from Fantas. And he said, Dan, we need an MOU so that we can put all in one place the incentives that are coming from the different local bodies. And can you do that for me? And he said, do you have any questions? And I did. I said, what is an MOU? So an MOU is a memorandum of understanding. And out of that evolves a practice that, yes, we the communities that are following best practices will always have an MOU. The state of Georgia lagged behind on that. Communities were doing MOUs for many years before that started being a DCA requirement when there's state grant money involved. There's a state MOU and a state performance and accountability agreement, which are not required by statute, but are required by regulation. So there's not a statute saying have an MOU, but it all goes back to the Constitution, which says don't give stuff away. And this is how you know that you're not giving stuff away. And I have the judge rule on that in the validation papers, and it's on the table for the world to see.
Best practices, but not statutorily required.
It's required, in my view, something like that's required by the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't have the phrase MOU in it, but it does address this issue.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chairman recognizes Senator Mills.
Yeah, and I'm not going to take up the day, but I do have this. Going back to training.
Yes, sir.
And my comment about local elected officials, I kind of think that ACCG and GMA should put, county commissioners have training with ACCG, and mayors and city council have training of their role by GMA. But maybe, in fact, I'm thinking about proposing this next session. What?
Yeah,
Oh yeah, I won't be here.
that's right. That's right.
All right, but for
Pre-file.
pre-file, that's funny. Wonder if I could. Anyway, just to make sure that they do, part of their training is economic development and the process and how it goes. I think it would help them choose the right candidates for those positions, and also everybody be on the same page. So I think that'd be a good thing that we would require or should.
I'm a big believer in education, but in my experience, there is a pretty good working relationship between authority board members and those who appoint them. Now, that's not everybody.
Yeah.
So I think some good could come out of that, and there is a story there. And I am actually grateful that we have this committee and we have this time together, because I honestly think some of the things that I've mentioned today are not widely known about the process, about the study by economists that goes into these projects, about the training, about GASB and all of that. I mean, there's a lot more out there than a lot of folks realize, and I hope this has helped.
Yeah, it will. And follow up, the general public usually is not paying attention. They're not looking at the ads that are required by law to place in there to alert the general public. That should be on top of this if they're interested at the beginning, instead of wait after it's all over, then complain about everything. But it is available for the general public from the very beginning, according to the notification.
Yes, it is. And not only do the authorities have to give notice of the meetings, they have to publish an agenda so the public knows what's being discussed. But I had to smile for a minute there because some members of the public do read this stuff. And even today, even though it says revenue bonds and there's no taxpayer liability, we always put that stuff in the ad. We still have development authority executive directors in some parts of the state getting calls at night. Why is the county selling these bonds and giving all this money to the company? And it's no such thing. So again, some folks are reading them. I'm not sure they're getting exactly the right information out of it, but the information is there. It's there in the ads and the legal section. It's a lot of authorities get newspaper coverage. I mean, I think most of them do. A lot of I read the Courier Herald in Dublin, and every time the Development Authority has a meeting, it's in the news because there is no other news. And we like to keep track of stuff like that. But
Well, you know, Dublin's
truly is out
Dublin's the fastest growing city in Georgia.
there. I'm going to play the Patsy. Why is that?
It's Dublin every day.
Dublin every day. Thank you. Chair recognizes Senator Gooch.
Dan, thank you for being here. Full disclosure, you represented.
One second, Senator. I'm trying to make your mic work. There you go.
There we go. You've represented Lumpkin County well over the last 20 years, and we thank you for that. I'll save that. In rural Georgia, like Senator Mullis and myself, we've experienced good economic growth with job creation and expansion. And the key word expansion is very important. Some of our local manufacturers would not be there today if it weren't for deals like what you helped us with some 20 years ago. And so we thank you for that. You're probably one of the experts in the room and in the state, but tell us how many other states have a gratuities clause similar to Georgia's that makes this so complicated?
Senator, some of them must, but I've yet to run across one. Alabama had a provision in its constitution that they actually changed to allow property tax abatement by vote of the elected officials. And one of the things you should know that Alabama envies Georgia. because we can be flexible. I mean, some of the things, for example, that I've done is you come up with excess costs, environmental costs, and you create a basket of credits. And so your justification for the incentives, when that's gone, the incentive is gone. They can't do that in Alabama. And it's not as, it's a little bit more trouble to do here. It doesn't just take a wave of your hand, because if you ever seen any of the documents that are involved, they're not much different than bond documents. But I do think that whether it's in your constitution or not, that within a state, it's the duty of the state officials and the local officials and the appointed officials to be good stewards of the public purse. And
Right.
whether it's in the Constitution or not, I think you ought to do it.
Well, thank you. But I'm not aware of any other state that has the gratuities clause that Georgia has. So, thank you.
So some of them require bonds, but I haven't run across gratuities as an issue.
Other questions of the committee? I need to ask two quick sensitive questions. Number one, are development authority members paid, or any development authority members paid?
There, if you read the Atlanta paper, you will know that there is a provision in the development authorities law that allows a per diem for basically the four most populous counties. It's not salary, it's a per diem. That's the only provision that allows compensation of directors as directors. And I do think that 3 out of the 4 that could do it are not doing it.
Can you clarify per diem for me?
Well, the Latin it means for the day.
For the day.
Mhm.
So thank you. Second question. Are you aware of any development authority members individually benefiting from any transactions that they have been involved in?
No, I mean, you're not, that violates the state statute on conflicts,
Correct.
the code of ethics.
Thank you. I just wanted to put those two things out there. Any other questions from the committee?
Yes.
All right. Well, one more. Oh, my goodness. Chairman Mullis, I spurred something here. I'm sorry.
One more thing.
One more
Yeah,
thing.
I can't imitate him, I would. So if a county decides to put it in their, because there is a county south of Atlanta, I think Henry, that pays all their appointed people to different boards. That's what I've heard. I don't know that for sure. So if it's in their ordinances or whatever, and they decide they want to pay their several boards, that would not be illegal, would it? Board members.
I hate to speculate on
Speculate,
a
please,
on a
speculate.
case like that. The wording in the development authorities law is directors shall not be compensated. And then there's another section that says that. Whether that means compensated by the development authority or compensated by the parent government, I can tell you there's not a case on that, or I'd know about it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chair recognizes Chairman Alden.
Do you remember the history? Because I don't know, I can't find out myself, of when the 4 counties that have populations were allowed to charge per diem. When and why did that happen?
I don't know when, but I can easily find out because the session law
Right.
is cited as a citation beside that code section. I can look that up and send it to you, but it's not new. The Development Authorities law was adopted in 1969. I don't think it was there since 1969, but it's been there for a long time.
Between 1980 and 1990, it was in 1986.
Okay, so Ed says between 1980 and 1990.
And the one development authority that's using it is still a little bit asking me some questions and asking legislative council about the per diem issue. So we might look at that again. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very grateful. Thank you, Mr. McRae. You are a wealth of information. We appreciate your time, your candor, and your expertise.
I'll just say this, it's been a real pleasure being here, and thank you all.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Okay, we're gonna we've got a lot of folks we want to make sure we have a chance to receive input from. I'm delighted to have Ed Wall with us this morning. Ed is another experienced, capable attorney dealing with downtown development authorities. He's with Piper Sandler, and we're going to ask him to kind of enlighten us on a number of issues, but certainly finance and operations associated with development authorities. And the committee should have a series of slides information that Mr. Wall has provided for us. So welcome. Thank you,
you,
for
Mr.
being with
Chairman.
us.
I want to correct you. I practice a lot of law, but I'm not.
You ain't
I'm not
one?
No, sir, I'm not a lawyer.
I'm not either.
Yeah.
Okay. So, hey, we're good. All right.
Thank you. My name is Ed Wall. I was born and raised in Milledgeville, Georgia in March of 1964. And I don't believe Senator Mullis went through there 9 months earlier, but I reckon it's possible. Yes, sir. And I went to Georgia Tech 1981. I graduated in 84, and I've only ever done this for 38 years. So Dan's got me by 12 years. And but I have been doing it for 38 years. I'm not nearly as good as Dan, but having done something over and over for 38 years, I have developed a little bit of a proficiency in it. So I'm an investment banker, financial advisor. I represent cities and counties, school boards, and authorities all across the state. I wanted to give you just a little history, keying in on some of the things Dan said. Why does the state of Georgia have the anti-gratuity provision? I have been told from lawyers who are now since dead, but they used to be in this body, that the Yazoo land frauds, when the state of Georgia sold through fraudulent means Alabama and Mississippi, they cut a deal with Thomas Jefferson for him to take over some of the debt. And our Constitution then says that you can't give away any state asset without receiving fair market value. And so it was a result of the Yazoo land frauds. No other state had anything like that. So that may be why we're unique. Two other things in state history. In the Civil War in 1865, the state repudiated the debt that occurred in between 1861 and 1865. And then in 1867, the carpetbagger governments came about. In 1876, I think it all got switched over, and the state repudiated the debt between 67 and 76. So twice in the state of Georgia's history did we repudiate debt. So the 1876 Constitution has in it the anti-gratuity provision, and there shall be no debt. And so from that day to the current 1983 Constitution, we've had all these constructs made out of clouds to try to do things that other states could just do regular way. And so one of the things is in 1969, the Georgia legislature created development authorities. And from 69 to today, Dan mainly, who is the expert in this, has pioneered a way to do tax abatement to get around all these constitutional provisions. And Dan has a great paper on his website, danmccray.com, called Bonds for Title. And as long as I've been in the business, anybody doesn't understand what we do, if say it's a new industry from Europe or somebody coming down here wanting to do tax abatement, I refer them to Dan's white paper called Bonds for Title. And so just in a nutshell, the way you do tax abatement and get around our Constitution is property that's owned by a political subdivision is exempt from property tax. So we have to get title to private stuff, put it in the name of the development authority, and then lease it back to them. And so I thought it might be helpful to y'all if I just walk you through a real life example. So let's make like y'all are a development authority or mayor and council. And so look on the front page of the handout that I had, and I don't know how to put it up on the screen. I sent it to Ashley, but do y'all have it before you?
We do. It's Project X.
Yes, sir.
Do we have it to where we can put it on the screen? Just 1 second. And Andrew, if you could help us, we'll get it on the screen so that the
This is
those
what
who are
it
here and those on stream can share in this information.
Where is it in
It's right behind, it should be right behind the agenda. Should be the first Project X document. If you give us just a second, we'll get it on the screen for everyone to see, and then we'll have it available online so that you can review it after the meeting is over. Senator Mullis, now's the time. You want to give your next farewell address, or
get started for a little while.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get him later. Okay.
I gotta let him give us.
So in Milledgeville, were you ever in Milledgeville?
I'm crazy about it.
I love Milledgeville. I think it's a wonderful place. Baldwin County. Yes, sir.
Let's say columns, capital and culture or something like that. That's their.
Well, so, you know, y'all are old enough to remember, a lot of people here aren't. I used to get in the elevator bank and they hear my accent. They say, where are you from?
Where are you from?
And I'd say Milledgeville. And they'd say, I've been there. And the elevators keep going. They say, I mean, I've been through there. So for folks that don't know it, the insane asylum was there.
We all remember.
You're welcome.
We lost our tech support. That's right. Thank you very much. We'll take a short break. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Here we go.
Yes, sir. Sir.
There we go.
That's it. Updated presentation. That's right.
All right.
As long as a PDF, it can't do as a PowerPoint. But,
Just still click that button forward.
There we go. That worked.
How do I move it forward?
just move this down.
Yes, we got it.
I realize that some of the numbers will be hard for us to read. The committee has it in front of them. We'll get you copies of it. Thank you, Mr. Wall. We appreciate your input. Why don't you walk us through this project?
Yes, sir. So I'm your financial advisor. A developer has come to me, an economic development director, and we're going to present to you this project. So developers come to me, and the economic development is, we call it Project X. We always give projects a stage name to try to protect the confidentiality of it. It's a 250 unit apartment complex. The fair market value pitched by the developer is 50 million. It'll have 300 construction jobs and 6 permanent jobs. And they've asked us for tax abatement. So I take you to the next page. Oh, mercy.
Get small.
Audience. So the next page, I'll start at the top left, and I've got the construction jobs, permanent jobs, and wage levels. And the reason I have that, when you have tax abatement, as Dan pointed out, you want to make sure the public is getting some benefit from it. And so there is this economic development analysis that some folks do, some folks don't. One thing that isn't done is a but-for analysis, they call it. In other words, you want to know from a developer, but for these free taxes, they ain't coming here, they're going to South Carolina. Or but for this tax abatement, they can't make the numbers pencil and can't get the project done. And so this project assumes that the but-for analysis has been done, that we agree that without this, the project can't be done. It's hard for you all to legislate but-for, but you really want your jurisdictions to go through that process. I've done business in Lumpkin. I've done business in Walker County. They always say no, they don't want to give tax abatement, and they only give it if they have to, and they give as little as possible. That's the kind of thing you want to go through with. So let's calculate what the tax abatement would be. The value for tax purposes is 50 million. Under Georgia, you assess property at 40% of fair market value. And so that's $20 million for fair market value. Let's look at the millage rates that would be abated. The title to this apartment project will be in the name of the development authority, so it will not owe any property taxes. And so the county has 8.788 mills. The water authority has a 2 mil tax. The fire district's 1.1 mills. The school board 3.628 for their bonds. 20 mills, they're at their constitutional limit. And then the city itself has a 4.5 mil rate. And so we would be abating 40 mills of property tax on a $50 million project. So we go on down and you see for 10 years, the taxes that they would pay on that project is $800,420 a year. There's a sort of a regular way to do a tax abatement, a regular schedule. In 2015, the Georgia Supreme Court had a precedent-setting Supreme Court case on a tax abatement transaction that got appealed from Superior Court to Georgia Supreme Court. And it sort of set out that everybody, the tax assessor, needs to have a standard process that it taxes or appraises development authority leases. And so when you do a tax abatement transaction, the property, the fee simple real estate, is not taxed. What gets taxed is the lease. So remember my example of bonds for title, the development authority holds title. They lease it back to the developer to operate. When the tax abatement business deal is over with, the title goes back to the developer and the lease is canceled. And so what is the leasehold interest? Well, this standard abatement schedule of 50%, 45, 40, that's used by Fulton Development Authority, Clayton Development Authority, Cobb Development Authority, and pretty much that's all you get. It's hard to get anything over that because based on that 2015 Supreme Court case, they want to stick to every leasehold interest in a development authority lease. There's a standard way that the tax assessor assesses that leasehold interest, and so they stick with that to try to stick within the 2015 Supreme Court decision. If I go over here, Project X savings starts out at 400,000, goes down over time, so it's $2.2 million. And you can see that in this particular type of transaction, the lease is called an estate for years, and the tax assessor will assess the fair market value based on this abatement schedule, and the tax commissioner will send out a tax bill based on that. And then the tax commissioner takes the taxes just like they would for anybody else and sends it out to all these taxing authorities pro rata based on their millage rate. And so you can see in this example here, the City of Angels is getting $45,000 to start. So it's getting $652,000 total. And so in this particular case, the company, the apartment project, is paying $5.8 million in taxes, getting a $2 million break, and the city is making $652,000. This could have been a vacant piece of property. It could have been a piece of property that the city actually owned and it wasn't paying any taxes at all. And so, but for this tax abatement, this project wouldn't have happened. It's so important that I tell y'all, as a guy who has been an expert in this business 38 years, tax abatement is needed. It's a worthwhile thing. And so I don't think that you all would ever want to throw it away. We got that anti-gratuity provision. Other states can give cash money for economic development. It's one of the few tools that we've got in order to compete. And so it is a useful tool. Let's go to the next page if we could. This is an estate for years transaction. The next one shows, I may need to get your tech help, Mr. Chairman. How do I go to the next page?
Help is on the way.
Thank you, boss.
I think it's just zoomed in a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Then I'll zoom in.
Yeah.
So this next page would demonstrate to you a lease as a usufruct. And so if you can see, we're at the same area at the top of the page. We got the same $50 million project. It's assessed at 40% of fair market value. So the assessed value is $20 million. We got the same millage rates and the same annual tax burden for $800,000. But let's say that instead of doing a 10-year tax abatement, we decide to do 20 years. So here we would do a transaction where the development authority would hold title to it for 20 years, and the lease back to the apartment owner is a usufruct. And here, and by the way, I went to Milledgeville, Georgia, and I'm not a lawyer, and my accent, I had to practice in the mirror for hours to get that down. Yes, usufruct. And just Senator Mullis, maybe you just call it a lease. Yeah. Yeah. And so here I was giving the apartment owner 30% break for 20 years. And you can see their tax savings would be $6 million over that 20-year period. But then we go over here, the water authority would get nothing. The city would get $560,000 a year. The county would get nothing. The county schools would get nothing. And so here, by making it a usufruct and not an estate for years, the tax assessor cannot tax a usufruct. By law, it never has any value. So best thing I can tell you, what's the difference between a usufruct and estate for years? If you lease a car and you have a 5-year lease, every year you're going to be building up equity in that car. And hopefully your equity is greater than it depreciates, but you're building up equity in that 5-year lease of that car. If you go to the movie theater and you get a ticket, it gives you a right to sit in a seat, but it doesn't really have any value because it's for a limited period of time. It's just for that movie, and then you're going to get thrown out. And so lawyers can tell you the difference. The actual legal definition of a usufruct has to have 5 or 6 things. But here in Georgia, that validation, you were talking about it, Chairman Oliver, as long as you get something validated, it doesn't make any difference if it's unconstitutional, if it's illegal. That validation order makes it forevermore valid, legal, and binding. So it's one of the reasons why our credits are higher. Our credit ratings for cities and counties and state is we have a higher credit rating than a similar town in another state that doesn't have validation. We don't even have bankruptcy for cities and counties and school boards. So you take Alabama, Pennsylvania, Illinois, a similar town with similar finances, our rating will be higher because that bond is validated. So no subsequent political body can get out of paying it, and there's no bankruptcy statute. And so validation is a key thing in Georgia. And so this type of transaction with a usufruct, where it exempts out all the other governing entities, I think this type of transaction is what drove Chairman Oliver to try to bring this to everybody's attention. And it has occurred in certain jurisdictions. I have personally done it in Forest Park and Clayton, where Forest Park bought the old Army base, Fort Gillem. And we went to the school board in the county, I represent both of them too, and got a deal with them that they agreed to let Forest Park do usufruct leases and take this money until they had enough money to pay the Army back $30 million to buy the base and $16 million for infrastructure to get Fort Gillem going. It's turned out to be a success story. They've got 3,500 jobs in that base. Cummins, Home Depot Supply, Kroger, it goes on and on, Amazon warehouse. Without a tax abatement, they couldn't have done that. And they got the agreement with the county and the school board that they would do this. About 3 years ago, they had enough money to pay the Army off, enough money to pay off that $16 million bond issue for infrastructure. And then they did a memorandum of understanding with the school board and the county that says every subsequent tax abatement Forest Park does, it'll be in a state for years, and they'll share all the money with all the jurisdictions. And so there was one example where it was done, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this usufruct with a 20-year lease was copacetic. I'm not a lawyer, but this is how I'm pitching to y'all as a city. Do you want to do the estate for years, for 10 years, and share the revenues with all the other entities? Or do you want to keep it all because you, City of Angels, have a particular project that you want done? So this is a real life example of how development authorities, cities and counties and schools are transacting business. I want to highlight one other thing over here to the last 2 columns. Development authorities get to charge 1/8 to 1% fee in order to do a transaction. And so here you see the principal outstanding is $50 million. And remember the way this thing works, the bonds for title, the development authority issues bonds that are validated in court of law. They use that bond to give to the developer to acquire title. Y'all know in a contract, you got to have consideration. And we call them phantom bonds in my business. They ain't no money changed hands, but the bonds get the title. And then when the transaction is over with, say 10 years or 20 years, those original bonds have been accruing interest at maybe 8 or 9 or 10% compounded. So in 10 or 20 years, that 50 million might be $250 million that the development authority owes, but the developer pays for it by stamping the bonds paid, and the development authority gives title back. Why do you do it that way? Well, if they're giving up an asset and getting debt canceled that's worth a lot more than the asset, they haven't violated anti-gratuity. So it was really a smart lawyer like Dan that says, I'm getting around the anti-gratuity provision by issuing these phantom bonds the value of them at the end of the transaction is so much greater than what the underlying asset is, they're not violating anti-gratuity. These bonds, the principal amount, as it reduces each year, the development authority gets to charge a fee. They can charge anything they want. 1/8 to 1% came about as that's what the IRS generally would allow for tax exempt bonds. And so it just became sort of rule of thumb in our business. Development authorities would charge a 1/8 to 1% as administrative fee. So you can see that the more transactions that the development authority does, the more incentive they have because they're making that money. And so in me presenting this to you as the City of Angels, you have a choice to do an estate for years, for 10 years, regular way, or you can do this transaction and the City of Angels can make a lot more money. Plus you'll get the 1/8 to 1% fee. The other thing I want to talk about is the Supreme Court case. So I've given you a copy of it in your handout. It's called SJN Properties LLC versus the Fulton County Board of Tax Assessors. Here, plaintiff alleged various things about a tax abatement in Fulton County, and they said that the Fulton County Board of Tax Assessors, one, couldn't make property of the Fulton County Development Authority exempt, and two, this ramp up of 50%, 45, 40, that thing that I was showing, they were saying that's not legal because the Constitution requires a Board of Tax Assessors to assess property at 100% of fair market value every year. And so I've highlighted a few phrases. I'm not a lawyer, and legal opinions, particularly from the Supreme Court, a lot of times don't make a lot of sense to me. But I try to read it careful, and I've highlighted certain points and worked with Dan and others to come up with it. When citizens try to get recourse in the validation hearing, normally they don't have enough money to hire a show enough lawyer. And so most of the times a validation intervention is decided in the favor of the government. They got people like me, people like Dan. We know what we're doing. The citizen comes up and says, look, the dog pound killed my dog and I'm mad about it. And the judge said, well, I'm sorry about that, but we're going to validate these bonds. They don't really realize what they're doing. Here, some citizens hired a lawyer named John Woodham, and he has made a business of intervening in validations in Fulton County. He intervenes in a lot of bond issues for Fulton County Development Authority. And I wanted to highlight here, the Supreme Court says, setting aside the questionable ethics of Woodham's assumption of the role as witness in a case he is prosecuting as counsel of record. Evidently, if you're a lawyer, you can't be your own expert witness. I learned that here. And so the Supreme Court just completely ignored his testimony. And if we go on down here, says it is a clear, if y'all are following, I'm highlighted part, it says a clear legal right, and I try to figure out what page I'm on. Yes, I'm on page 7, Mr. Chairman. So page 7. So it says it's a clear legal right to the relief sought may be found only where the claimant seeks to compel the performance of a public duty that an official or agency is required by law to perform. So what the Supreme Court's talking about there, the Board of Tax Assessors clearly compelled to assess property at 100% of fair market value. And so they're going to get into the middle of this, even though they don't think much of Woodham because he was his own expert witness. Then they go on to say here, SJN, the plaintiff, seeks to compel the Fulton County Board of Assessors to fulfill its statutory duty in relation to the assessment of ad valorem taxes within its jurisdictions. The essence of its duty is to see that all taxable property within the county is assessed and returned at its fair market value, and that fair market values as between the individual taxpayers are fairly and justly equalized so that each taxpayer shall pay as nearly as possible only such taxpayers' proportionate share of taxes. Then I highlight the next one. Tax assessors are authorized to fix the fair market value of property for taxes from the best information obtainable. This does not require the tax assessors to use any definite system or method, but demands only that the valuations be just and that they be fairly and justly equalized among the individual taxpayers, according to the best information possible. So I go on down here, I highlight, they say the 50% ramp up formula is an analytically sound approach that comports with standard appraisal practice. Go to the next page. It says, noting with approval the County Board of Tax Assessors' long-standing policy of taxing leasehold interest in real property that are subject of a financing agreement at 50% of the appraised value for the term of the lease. So y'all remember me telling you that after this 2015 Supreme Court case came out, all the tax assessors in the state went to the annual convention at Jekyll Island. I'm making that up, but y'all can imagine it happening. And the tax assessor says, based on this, with our lawyer's advice, we got to assess all these leases with development authorities the same way. And a lot adopted that. And so that's how this 10-year starting at 50% came about as a result of this. And then I highlight the last thing down here at the bottom. In the end, though much ink is spilled in the parties' debate over whether the 50% ramp up formula in the abstract is the best or even a valid methodology for valuing the leasehold estates here, the plaintiff's mandamus claims fall for the simple reason that it has adduced no evidence that any actual assessment of any particular property has been or is other than fair market value. So what the Supreme Court justices are saying here, we are the trier, we do law, we don't do facts, and no facts have come before us that says this 50% is bad. So let's say that Senator Burns, you own a piece of property and you don't have a tax abatement. And across the road, Senator Mullis has an exact piece of property and he has a tax abatement. His 50% leasehold interest is going to cut his taxes in half. So clearly the tax assessor is assessing his property different than yours, but there's a validation order in place. So the tax assessor has no choice but to do that. But if someone were to come to court and point just that example, like I told you, and they had clear expert witnesses that this estate for years that you couldn't assess somebody's property different than somebody else's property merely because they had this tax abatement, would a judge fine for them? I don't know. You know, lawsuits, a ham sandwich could win. But my point I'm trying to say is this whole construct of the Georgia Constitution with the anti-gratuity clause, with the debt, no debt being in the Constitution, the 1969 Development Authority's law, the way this tax abatement has worked is necessary for us in Georgia to do it. But because of the way it's been having to work around these provisions of the old Constitution, we have come up with this system. Does the system work? The system has some problems with it. The court system in numerous validation cases have sided with local governments to help them be able to do this tax abatement. But my job, when you all asked me to come testify, and having worked with Senator Gooch and Senator Mullis before, I just want to give you all the facts and let y'all try to decide what you wanted to do. And then if I could, I'll go just to my last slide and then I'll hush and let y'all talk. The issues that I saw for the study committee is, do you agree that property tax abatement is useful and worthwhile tool for economic development in Georgia? Next is, do you want to standardize what the abatement could be? Do you want it to be 10 years, whatever it takes? Do you want to codify what can be a usufruct lease for tax assessors? Tax assessors tell me they know a usufruct generally needs to be 5 years or less, but if they have a court order from a judge in validation saying a 25-year transaction is a usufruct, they have to go by it because that validation order trumps everything else. Do you want to codify it that the usufruct lease is 5 years or 10 years, or you want to try to talk about it? I believe the law already says that, but the validation order cures it. Next bullet point, do you want to tighten what kinds of assets can receive tax abatement by codifying the assets that the development authorities can hold title to? In other words, do you want to incentivize every class of property, or do you only want to do certain types? Do you want to encourage or make city, counties, and schools talk or agree? So in my two examples, the cities, counties, and schools all shared in the estate for years. In the usufruct, they did not. Do you want to give each standing in the validation process of the other? And do you want to limit it to just the metro Atlanta area jurisdictions where most of the issues occur? I've not had a single trouble in the rural areas. That's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you for your input and your expertise. Provides a lot of food for thought. Chair recognizes Chairman Mullis.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Wall, for being here today. And
Yes,
I
sir.
would say that you and Dan McCrae are experts in this arena. And I know that Dan has a great reputation and you have a
Dan's a lot
equally, and you have a great reputation too. And I'm just playing with you. But in your 38 years, I believe you said,
Yes, sir.
I've written some questions down prior to you getting here, so let me read them. In your 38 years of representing local governments, do you believe that tax abatement makes a difference when we're in economic development?
Absolutely, Senator. I think it's one of the tools that I would hope y'all would always keep.
Yeah, and in our competing with other states, they're using it.
Yeah.
I mean, other things that we're not even using.
They can give cash money.
That's it, the gratuity clause.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I represent an area that I have Alabama on one side and Tennessee on the other side. I'm in the corner, and they can give cash as they did in Volkswagen in Chattanooga, Tennessee, for I think $760 million worth, and that was 10 years ago or
Yes,
more.
That's right.
So, I mean, the competition is huge, and we've done great with our less or limited efforts that
Yes,
we have here. Also, you said this earlier, and it's a great point. If you have a government-owned property like an industrial park, there's no taxes coming off that property currently if it's empty or has little effort.
Yes.
So if you recruit a company there and you start an abatement process, and I don't like using that word, but okay, an abatement process, you're eventually going to have full taxes on that property from that industry.
Yes, sir.
Or an existing industry that runs into trouble. You want to help them get back on their feet, like during 2008-9 when the economy hit the ground. One of my counties went back and helped a county with a lesser abatement.
I helped you save two of them.
Yeah, well, I
remember.
wasn't going to be exact, but
Okay.
yes. But you know,
Yes,
and
sir.
and that, I think that's important again to keep that company, in my case, that had 2,000 jobs.
Yes, sir.
So and they've expanded since then and rocking and rolling. So no, my area that I know of has never asked for abatement or any incentives for a housing unit.
No.
Ours are strictly been industrial sites or companies that have been recruited or existing, which, as Senator Gooch said, are actually more important to keep your major industries afloat sometimes because they're going to pay off. And
And you've always done the state for years, shared it with all the local governments.
yes, yeah, I have 4 counties, and I was going to talk about this later, but in my tax assessors, 2 counties do it right and 2 counties struggle with getting the right abatement or the right assessment, I think.
Yes, sir.
All right, next question, Mr. Chairman, would you give me a little latitude here? You're very kind. Well, you know, I'm on that has been circuit, but anyway, do you believe that given local government standing in another's validation proceedings, could that be abused by a county or city?
I presume it would be used as leverage by one against the other. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and especially in loss
Negotiations.
Thank you.
Yes.
Negotiations.
Yes.
And you know, they're involved in that now. Some counties are, I guess all of them are. I don't know.
Those that have loss. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I have a school system that has the loss,
Right.
not the county. And they're only what, a handful or 2.
10, 5 or 6,
that
7,
right?
8, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Which I don't know how they let that go.
With it
But-
causes local constitutional amendment, but before
I-
83.
But you don't have to put an amendment on there if you don't want it to happen.
Right.
Yeah. So I was shocked. All right. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I know you're grateful for this. I believe that there have been maybe abuses in abatement. I don't know of any, but there may have been. And our goal would be try to remedy any problem, if there is any, without throwing a baby out with the bathwater.
Yes.
Because my fear, as Senator Gooch has mentioned our last meeting, is being the number one place to do business and all of our great economic development growth, we don't want to destroy that. and we're in the top, we're number one here and top 5 in other places. We don't want to be the bottom 5 or the
Yes.
bottom 10.
Right.
I mean, we want our economy to thrive if possible. So in our efforts to curtail any issues that are questionable, we appreciate your help, Dan help, and other experts to make sure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yes, sir. I agree.
So
with you
you'll be a part of
100%.
that?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be quiet for now
Thank
until the next time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair recognizes Chairman Oliver.
I agree that tax abatements are essential, although it's not true that every state gets them. Texas doesn't allow them, doesn't allow them at school boards. So it's a mixture out there. But I'm not for doing away with them.
Not for doing what?
I do not want to do away with them.
Yes, ma'am.
I agree with you. Where did the 1/8 of 1% fee come from? You said that and I missed it. That's not statutory. That's
So years ago, housing authorities were created to do tax exempt bonds for single family housing loans
Mhm.
and for apartments for multifamily housing. And the IRS promulgated a rule that says a housing authority could charge 1/8 of 1% as a fee to do transactions on behalf of developers. So like Post Properties, John Williams, all of his apartments started out as Post. They were all done as tax exempt bonds through local housing authorities. The IRS hates tax exempt bonds because the interest that's paid on them is exempt from federal and state income tax.
so it's
So
a
they try to
federal-
keep the principal amount down. So they limited the amount of 1/8 to 1%. Development authorities, when I started in the business, there was hardly any tax abatement. After the 2008 recession, it sort of exploded because banks quit lending money. And so developers were trying to make deals pencil. Before 2008, it was just really great big old manufacturing plants and that sort of thing. After 2008, almost everybody trying to do a project and couldn't get a bank loan asked for a tax abatement. Development authorities just sort of adopted that administrative fee and limited it to 1/8 to 1%. They're not required to keep it to that.
Thank you. They're not required, but it's an accepted standard coming from an IRS ruling. Your example of Fort Gilliam included by negotiations of your entire package, the city and the school board.
Yes, ma'am.
And that was something that we have considered on the House side and haven't really adopted as to whether or not notice should be provided to other impacted governments. How many of the development authorities in your experience do directly involve the school board and the local impacted governments?
So that as Dan talked, there's 159 counties, 450 cities, 180 school systems. That's the only one I can recall. Most of my development authority clients are afraid of the school boards because they always say no. For instance, a tax allocation district, a TAD. Georgia law requires a TAD that the jurisdictions whose taxes make up the TAD have to grant their approval.
Right.
The House and the Senate passed the Pilot Restriction Act that said if I take, in my example, that pilot payment, the amount of money that the company pays, if I pledge that to the payment of bonds, it's just like the TAD. I have to go seek the approval of the county and the school board. But if you do a regular way tax abatement, you don't have to ask anybody anything.
You're aware, and probably the committee members are also aware that issue is in litigation around several different jurisdictions, and the local judges are saying that the school board should be a part of the bond validation hearings. And so that's a tension that's brewing around that I've been puzzling about. And it seems to me that the best practices that my colleagues tell me across the state is that we always talk to them. So that's an issue, Mr. Chairman, that I appreciate you using an example that included negotiations with the other impacted entities. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, ma'am.
Chair recognizes Senator Parent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Wall. So do you have any thoughts on when you mentioned several times, like, well, this wouldn't have gotten done without the tax abatement? Do you have any thoughts or opinions on how we know or local government knows that it wouldn't get done without a tax abatement? Because sometimes I'm skeptical about that. Some I certainly think is true, but others I'm like, really? I kind of think they want to build that.
So I'll give you a concrete example. So I've been doing this 38 years. you know, they always say, how do you know when a developer's lying? The lips are moving. And so, I mean,
That was sort
I've
of the
heard that about lawyers.
part of my
yeah, I know, and I don't mean
I
to-
know.
it's just a joke, but
Yeah.
but point of it is when, in my example, when a developer tells me the project was worth 50 million, I got to go root around and see if that's true. When they tell me they're going to do 300 construction jobs, I got to root around and see if that's true. So you try and, you know, it's not a bad thing, but they're on one end of a transaction and I'm on the other. And so they want as much as they can get, and I'm wanting to pay them as little as I can. So I'll give you a concrete example, city of Hateville, Georgia. Hateville had the Ford Motor Plant closed in 2006, and it took away 40% of their tax digest. They doubled their millage rate from 8 mills to 16 mills. They were just, I mean, it was just hammering them. So they wanted to take that Ford Motor Plant and repurpose it and do something with it. And a developer came to him, Jim Jacoby. He bought the Ford Motor Plant, and then he partnered with a European company to build a hotel called the Solis Hotel. They wanted tax abatement. And they said, you know, we got noise from the airplanes flying back and forth. And so the city, like Dan, we did a memorandum of understanding. We gave him a tax abatement in order to build the Solis Hotel. The Solis Hotel got built. So then in the next election, 3 folks ran for city council and said we shouldn't do a tax abatement. And in that Solis Hotel, 4 citizens had hired a lawyer to intervene in the validation. The developer paid them a fee to make them go away, and the judge validated the bonds. And so the whole political environment around Hateville was the city council has given away our money with tax abatement, and they didn't have to. That Solis Hotel was going to get built anyhow. Well, all I could tell them was I didn't think that was the case. I kicked the tires as much as I could, but be that as it may, 3 council people got beat and 3 new ones came on. I was expecting to get fired, but they did not fire me. Another developer came in with another hotel, and they wanted a tax abatement and said they had to have it because they had to spend $5 million for soundproofing in order to build it there because of the airplane traffic. And so I negotiated MOU, brought it to mayor and council. Mayor and council said, if we don't approve this, do you think they'll still build it anyhow? I said, you know, I don't really know. That's been for 38 years. That's the age old question. And now I got Senator Parent asked me that same question. So they turned it down. They said, we're not going to do it, but we don't believe in tax abatement. And the hotel did not get built. So I do believe that there are cases where it is required. I do believe there are also cases where it gets done and it wasn't required.
And so, follow up, Mr. Chairman. So your part of your job is to figure out whether it's needed and call their bluff
Yes.
as much as humanly possible.
Yes.
Because I mean, let's face it, most of our city council people and commissioners are not experts. They don't have really the experience, education, or tools to go up against Wall Street or whoever it's going to, you know, lawyers that do this 100% of the time. So I just feel like probably a little more times than not, we get a little bit taken for a ride on some of it.
And there's one thing particular, Dan talked about the Georgia Tech study that they do. Remember, he had some acronym for it, but before you do a tax abatement, you have this expert come in and do a study. And I think Georgia State does it, Georgia Tech does it, and there's a local firm called Bleakley and Associates, they do it. But when they do that study, they aren't doing a but-for analysis. They're just saying, here's the jobs, here's the economic development, here's what you're paying for them. It is hard for you to legislate but for. I don't know if you can or you can't, but that horse trading, like, do you really need it? It's a art. It's not a science, but
Sure.
that's my only point. I don't know how you legislate the but for.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Chair recognizes Senator Gooch.
Just follow up with what Miss Oliver was asking about the 1/8 of 1%. Isn't it true that fee is what is used by the development authorities to cover their overhead to administer those lease purchases, bond for titles? And without that, they would have to go to the taxpayers through the development authority's budget or the county commissioner's budget. So the developers are actually paying the 1/8 of 1% through the bond proceeds. Is that not correct?
The senator from District 51 knows that about which he speaks.
Thank you, sir. And to follow up on,
First, well, maybe not first.
I'm no expert, but I have a little experience in this as a sole commissioner where you and I met 22
sir.
years ago and being the Development Authority Director for several years as well. The art of the deal is not to lose a deal,
Yes,
correct?
yes, sir.
So if you have an existing industry like I had in Dahlonega, a manufacturer that came in the 70s from Torrington, Connecticut, which was at the time Torrington Bearings, they were going to expand their business. They had a place in South Carolina that was being offered to them, a very lucrative deal by the state with cash, things that we can't offer. They were actually going to give them the property, give them the building, whatever, millions of dollars in cash to get them to come to that state, which potentially would have shut down an existing factory in my hometown where 300 plus people made a living. So we had to decide, are they playing poker at our expense or are they serious or not? So we played ball with them. And we ended up doing a $50 million bond issue with Dan McCrae's help. You weren't involved with that, but we kept the plant. We kept it open. We doubled the capacity of the plant, almost doubled the employment base for local people. So you don't want to lose an existing business or lose a good prospect just because you think the developer's bluffing.
And excuse me to interrupt you, and you could not have done that without this tax abatement tool.
100%. The tax abatement was the deal. Now, should we get permission from the local school board to do that? I don't think so, because their job is to educate our children. The first thing they ask me as a commissioner every year is how much has the tax digest grown? So I know how much more revenue I can collect in taxes so I can put it toward their budget. They do not control the tax digest. They don't control the economic development of the community. Their job is to educate their children. So I don't think they should have legal standing in that. So we've always worked well with our local governments, and I think most counties do around the state. I'm just careful. We do not need to break what's working. We do not need to kill the goose that lays the golden egg in the state. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Senator Rhett. I was going to say Butler, but no. Butler, that's right. Y'all.
That's right.
We're glad to have y'all here.
Glad you're here, sir. Represent Cobb County, and we have a good working relationship between the Development Authority and the school system. We have them included in the process, and that's exhibited by the $1.6 billion bond we worked on together last week.
For Lockheed, right?
Right.
Yes.
But I just had a quick question. You had your 10-year and your 20-year. What would determine which one a person, you probably went over it, but what would determine which one would prefer one over the other?
So it's a philosophical thing. If elected government really wants to say that the department has kids in it and the kids are going to be going to the school system should not be cut out. That could be a philosophical thing. Other times it could be that the school board and the city and the county don't get along and says, I asked them to build a high school in my city and they didn't do it. So to heck with them. I ain't going to give them any money. So it just becomes sort of a philosophy of the politicians making the decision.
I didn't know how to pronounce it. So I called it a lease.
That's all right. I don't blame you. It took me 2 years to learn how to do it. Yeah.
Senator Rhett, are you good?
I'm good.
Thank you. Go back to your slides on the estate for years versus the use for lease.
Yes, sir.
Question: Who decides which of these two options is used?
The Development Authority.
So the Development Authority can choose the estate for years, or they can choose Usifer. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What is in the best interest of the Development Authority? Depends on the deal.
It's a subjective thing.
Okay. Because the Usifer lease back in your example case, at least, it was apparently a downtown development authority. Is that correct?
This was purely made up.
Purely made up.
Yes.
But my question would be, would a downtown development authority ever use a state for years?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and
And
in that case, the revenue would be shared across the governmental entities. Is
Yes,
that
sir.
correct?
But a DDA could also do a usufruct.
But a DGA could also do a usufruct.
Yes, sir.
Now, in your experience, what's the relative percentage of estate for years versus usufruct?
Probably Dan could speak to it better than I can, but probably 85, 90% estate for years and 10% usufruct. Usufruct's very rare.
Okay, so roughly 80+%, and then much less.
Is Dan still here?
He has had to exit. So
Okay, but
we can get his input on that.
I'm satisfied
And
that's the
I-
case.
And I appreciate it. One of the things that Chairman Oliver asked was how many authorities have consistently partnered with other entities that they impact. And the problem, part of the challenge we have on this committee is it's hard to figure out how many development and downtown development authorities and joint development authorities and regional development authorities and there are. We think there's somewhere around 575.
Gosh.
All right, so
So that means that some places have a DDA and a development authority. So there's two.
Some communities have multiple.
Then there's joint.
And there's joint, and
Right.
now we've just authorized regional. So there's potential within certainly large communities, DeKalb County or Fulton or Cobb or Gwinnett. There could be multiple development authorities within that political jurisdiction. So is it accurate that in your experience that only in the situation with Fort Gillem that there was a strong partnership, or is it just?
So I don't mean lots of places I do business from Tybee Light to what's that old saying, from Bainbridge to
Raven Gap.
Tybee Light, your Raven Gap, whatever that saying is. I do business all over the state. Most jurisdictions, they drink coffee in the same cafe diner. They're pals. They
Small
want
town, right?
they want new jobs. And
Right.
so they all get along
And they all talk.
and they all talk.
And they all talk and they communicate.
Right. And so
And-
Fort Gillem was just an example of a usufruct buy-in by
Buy-
school board,
buy-
buy-in. They agreed to it because Forest Park, little bitty Forest Park, was having to shell out its taxpayers on the hook for 30 million to the Army and 16 million for infrastructure. And so it was a way that the whole community could help Forest Park pay for this. And it has generated 4,500 jobs for that community. That is the only example I know of where school boards in the county were engaged, that they were giving up their taxes to help something. Many places cooperate and most places do a state for years, but there's no intergovernmental contract that mandates that. Currently, certainly the Georgia law doesn't mandate it. But I just gave you an example of one place where usufruct was done and other people were engaged.
I appreciate the questions that you shared with the committee, and I want to pick back up on one or two of those.
Yes, sir.
Is there a magic term? 10 years, 5 years, 20 years? Is there a magic term?
So the metropolitan Atlanta counties of Fulton and Cobb, Gwinnett, Clayton, their tax assessors believe that in order to comply with that 2015 Supreme Court case, they had to have a magic standard thing. And that's where they do 10 years starting at 50%. DeKalb took a different tack. They have 9 different standard things. So if you bring in a project that's less than 20 million, you can choose a 5-year, a 10-year, or a 15-year with different abatement percentages. If your project's 50 million to 75 million, you got 3 more. And if it's above 150 million, you got 3 more. So I think maybe they have 11 standard things. And I think that they went to their tax assessor to get a memo that the tax assessor would agree that he would assess these leasehold interest according to these 11 different Excel spreadsheets. And he disagreed. He would not do it. But he says, if you get a validation order, I'll adhere to it. So that was how DeKalb did it
But they got a validation order. Is that correct?
on every project they have done so far. But there have been a lot of DeKalb is the one place there's been a lot of litigation back and forth.
Okay. Yeah. All right. It's interesting that the other metro counties are comfortable with a more standard approach. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll finish up in just a second, but I want to recognize Senator Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm a big proponent of the development authorities in Gwinnett County, my home county. They've been instrumental in redevelopment of many of our cities. Also creating a kind of a new college town with Georgia Gwinnett College in Lawrenceville, connecting the college to the downtown. And it's really transformed the city. One question I got, do you see many of these tax abatements where, on some of these larger projects like Senator Beach mentioned, the Avalon, we've also got the Exchange where the Top Golf is at 20 and 85, where development would take a decade. If they didn't have, to say, the development may have never happened, but it could have happened, but it would take 10, 15 years through many phases where this tax abatement allowed them to do it in one phase. Like the Exchange was open in less than 2 years, which had, mixed use, live, work, play type of development there with, the Top Golf and Andretti Speedway and, got multifamily and also office space there as well.
There's no question. I agree with Senator Beach that without tax abatement, Avalon would have taken a lot longer to get done. That tax abatement allowed them to pencil all the infrastructure, which drags down a transaction penciling out for return. So you take your developer and you do an Excel spreadsheet, you got a net income, you go to the bank to borrow money. If you can have a lower tax of payment, the expenses are lower, that net income number is higher, you can borrow more money to get something done. And I'm satisfied that the project you name and the project Senator Beach named, without tax abatement, it would have taken a lot longer to get done.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Again, I apologize for my redundancy, but I have to ask the same two sensitive questions. Are you aware of any development authority members being compensated for their services?
Just the Fulton County Development Authority.
Just the Fulton County Development Authority. And are you aware of any development authority members that personally benefit from their role on a development authority through any means?
I'm gonna plead the fifth on all that.
I'm not. Yeah. And
I mean,
I'm aware.
I ain't gonna turn in my friend.
Yeah. Certainly not the ones that write the notes.
I'm just kidding. I mean, not too bad.
Okay. All right. And then your position, your suggestion, recommendation, certainly part of the issue is who knows what's going on and when do they know it? And then do they have a right to issue an objection before the decision is made? How do you come down on that? Do you have any guidance for the committee?
I'm so proud I ain't a senator or a house member.
Thank you for your candid
Thank you,
input.
Senator.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Wall. We appreciate you. As the room will know, we're running behind schedule. That's because of the significance of this issue. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we're going to reconvene, and we're going to hear from ACCG, GMA, Georgia School Board Association, and the Associated General Contractors of Georgia. We'll try to limit that discussion to about 15 minutes each, and that way we'll get out of here before dark. Thank you. We'll take about 10 minutes. Hear from representatives of ACCG. Jeff Rader. Jeff, are you available? Thank you. And Clint Mueller. Clint, are you available? Very good. If this is these are representatives from ACCG, and they will share some of their perspectives on it. We're going to try to, if we can, limit your comments to maybe 10 minutes or so, and then the committee will do about 5 minutes of Q&A, and we'll gain some insights. Any additional information you want to share with the committee, we'll be happy to take it. Thank you. Jeff?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is my mic on?
It is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Clint Mueller. I'm the legislative director for ACCG, the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia. We represent the 159 county governments in the state of Georgia. And with me, I have DeKalb County Commissioner Jeff Rader. I'm going to talk a little bit from the statewide perspective and from our policy position that's been adopted. And then I think Commissioner Rader is going to talk a little bit more about DeKalb County specifically. So we started looking at this issue at ACCG about 3 years ago, and about a year ago, we had a formal study committee within our organization to take a look at this issue. And ultimately, we adopted a position, and you have that with you. You should have it as a handout. If not, I've got some extra copies, but I believe you all have a printed handout of our formal position.
It should be in your folder.
Yes. And we continue to look at it and revise it. And we've made some additional revisions this summer, and I'll talk about those. First of all, I want to say that we do value development authorities as an extremely important economic development tool. We certainly would not want to do anything to jeopardize it or lose it as a tool. Our county commissioners, has already been stated here, do make appointments to the county development authorities. We obviously have city development authorities, and then we have other types, joints, regional development authorities, but our county commissioners are very involved in trying to recruit business to their communities. As you also know, these are separate entities. So once we appoint the board members, we can't just remove them from office if we feel like they're not doing the job we thought they would do. We don't have the authority to remove them. And again, they are legal separate entities from county and city government. We do have also an interest in balancing the tax base. There's the county government, the digest was mentioned earlier. The county governments do put together that tax digest that the schools and the cities use. So we do have an interest in that tax digest and making sure we're balancing everybody's interests. I'm going to focus my comments more today on a specific area that's fairly new, but we're concerned about some potential issues that could come up in the future, with which you've already heard about these usufruct deals, and you've already heard that they're only about 10%, I think is what the former gentleman said, maybe, of the deals that are being done. So this is and I'm going to use this term abatement loosely. I know it's not an abatement technically, it's a lease, and that usufruct is really a non-taxable lease. So you get no taxes over the duration. In his example, he used 20 years. That obviously is a bigger deal than the typical lease buyback arrangement, when you do get some funding, some tax dollars off that project, and that gradually increases, usually over a 10-year period. So when you're giving up all taxes for, say, a 20-year period, that's a different kind of animal. We still have to provide services to a lot of these projects. And I'm also going to tailor my comments to a specific type of project, because we really don't have any interest in the typical development authority projects that do manufacturing, warehouse distribution, all those things that you and I probably think of historically that have been done. That's not what our interest is. Our interest is in housing and retail. Why housing and retail? There's a different demand on governmental services when you talk about housing and retail. I mean, with housing, you're putting kids in the school system that have to be educated, and somebody's got to pay for that. When you're talking about housing and retail, you have a lot of public safety services. We have to send police officers out there on a regular basis, firefighters out there on a regular basis. There's a lot of other services that cost somebody to pay for these types of developments. So our concern really is, if you use a usufruct type of structure for something like an apartment complex or even a mixed use where you've got retail and you're giving up the tax base for up to say a 20-year period, well, who's paying for that? Obviously that tax burden is going to be spread amongst all the other taxpayers. And so there may be some very legitimate reasons to do that. We've talked about the Avalon project. That's obviously a mixed use type of development. And it has obviously benefits well beyond its boundaries, the spinoff benefits there. But those are the things that we feel like that the county commissioners need to have a little bit more say-so involvement in. And so where do we get that? We're not asking for any kind of veto or somebody having to come to us and say, okay, here's the project, like a tax allocation district where they do have to get our permission. We're not asking for that. What we're saying is that when the bond validation proceeding takes place, that we should be given standing to at least go before the judge. And if there is concerns, be able to express those concerns to the judge. Now, that's not a veto power because the judge will have to decide whether those are valid concerns or not and whether to move forward or not. But at least it gives the county government a forum to express those concerns that they don't currently have. Now, I know some people will say, well, can a county commissioner go in their personal capacity as a citizen? Yes, they could go in their personal capacity as a citizen, but they're coming at it from a different perspective, right? The way the project affects you and I as a citizen is different than the way a project impacts an actual unit of local government, like a county. And so I think there needs to be that perspective, or at least the opportunity to have that perspective brought to the table so the county governing authority can tell the judge, hey, we think, as we've talked about earlier, this project would have gotten built anyways without this, or this is too generous of a deal, giving them no taxes on it for 20 years. So that is really where I think our focus is we would like to see not standing for the traditional type of project like manufacturing, but we would like standing at the bond validation proceeding when the project includes retail and housing. So that's specifically what we're asking for. Now, also in our position paper here, you'll see that we are asking for some additional notice. We like to have more notice on the front end. I know that these are having to be advertised in the paper and understand that there's notice already being provided out there. But too many times our county elected officials aren't necessarily reading the paper or seeing that notice. So we just want to make sure. And I think in 99% of the places, there is good communication and they're getting the notice. It's for that isolated situation for whatever reason, there's not good communication between the local development authority and the elected officials. Obviously, for county governments, we expect our county development authorities to have that good communication. And I hope that the city development authorities would have good communication also with the county commissioners, but that may or may not be the case in some places. The other thing that has been talked about real little today, but it's the payment in lieu of tax, the pilot. And that's where you can basically recoup some of your lost tax revenue through a payment in lieu of tax. The development authority, that's part of the negotiation in the upfront deal as to whether there's going to be a pilot in place. And that we feel like if there's going to be a pilot that replaces lost ad valorem taxes, that needs to be equally shared across the board. In other words, one local government shouldn't get a pilot to replace lost ad valorem taxes that the other local governments don't get. So for example, a city development authority, if they took a pilot to replace some of the lost city property taxes, maybe they replace 20% of the taxes. Well, they should also do that for the county and the school system. That if it should be across the board. Now, if they don't take anything to replace their ad valorem taxes, that's fine, but just make it even across the board. And then the last thing, we've talked a lot about data here and what information you can get. And I have looked, I mean, we talked about the GASB rule. I've looked and I can't find a central place where I can find out how many of these usufruct deals are being done and how many have pilots associated with them. And I know there's the Department of Community Affairs is here. They do require an annual report. So these development authorities are reporting already annually to the Department of Community Affairs. So it would be fairly easy to add some additional requirements in that already existing annual report to disclose if they've got deals that involve usufructs or pilots. So at least we could get a better understanding as of how much of this is going on. Again, you heard from their last speaker about what they thought the percentage was, but I don't think we actually know. And the only way we would actually know is if there's some centralized collection of that data. So that would be another recommendation we would make. So with that, I'll stop and I'll turn it over to Commissioner Jeff Rader to talk a little bit about his perspective from DeKalb County's point of view.
Thank you, Clint, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having us here today. I'm here before you as a member of the DeKalb County Commission, but I wanted you to know that, I do have other background in this. I'm a city planner with a degree in economic development concentration. Also have worked for Metro Atlanta Chamber and for Regional Business Coalition, Home Builders Association, other business groups. So my background is in this area. And, certainly, as Clint said, I certainly understand that importance of the adequate tools in order to encourage economic development. I would submit that my most important qualification here, though, now is as a member of a governing authority that has to levy taxes and has to make budgetary expenditures in order to provide services. And in that capacity, I serve my constituency and the public in order to ensure that taxes are equitably collected and expended in our jurisdiction, DeKalb County, Georgia. As you've heard today, the power to shelter valuable private real estate from ad valorem taxes, which is commonly called tax abatement, is derived from the common sense principle that the property belonging to government should not be subject to taxation. Through complex legal maneuvers, profitable development, including apartments and shopping centers, are given the same status as schools, roads, and water systems, despite the costly burden that they place on public service delivery. Because this power is derived from a general principle of state law, and it can be misapplied, and there are no statutory restrictions on its use, and because one agency can abate the taxes due to another, and can contract to receive a share of the revenues itself, it's ripe for abuse. And I think that that's an important aspect to recognize, is that a city can abate county taxes and school board taxes. The county can do likewise with the other jurisdictions, and those jurisdictions are not accountable to the taxpayers in other areas when they make those decisions, and in fact are financially vested in many cases because of the lack of a regulatory framework. The only venue that you can challenge an abuse of abatement is in Superior Court review of the bonds issued by the Development Authority to effect the transaction. And this simple statutory standing before these courts is there only to give us the opportunity to make the public's case in the protection of public tax revenues. As he mentioned, this is not dispositive. We can't veto validations. All we want is an ability to be able to make our case to the Superior Court, which is responsible for making a determination as to whether or not the issuance of these bonds are in compliance with law and in the public interest. The standing only requires the courts to consider what we have to say, but standing would also promote dialogue and build consensus between the taxing authorities on which transactions should be undertaken, and I believe would soon result in formal memorandum of understanding or intergovernmental agreements between these agencies in order to be able to resolve these issues. And as a result would mean that there wouldn't be challenges to validation because these issues would have been renegotiated. Currently, tax abatement is cloaked in obscurity. No one knows how many thousands occur across the state in number. The amount of taxes lost is only available in individual annual audits and not aggregated in any place, and the receipt of such of the special consideration, there's got to be more reporting and more aggregated data on this issue. I would like to share with you just a couple of examples of misuse to illustrate the fact that it can occur. in a municipality in our county in order to relocate the training facility for for a professional sports team. The local development authority undertook a usufruct tax abatement for a period of 15 years, and they split the proceeds between the development authority itself and the business that was moving their facility to the county. In other cases, we've had municipalities basically abate the taxes of the county and the school board, but through administrative payments, be able to recoup the tax revenues of that were due to them. And then we also have seen other activities where properties that are not subject to any current development, but instead the owner wants to shelter them from the carrying cost of property tax, has sought and received tax abatements in order to allow them to actually keep property undeveloped. I would also say that an unintended result of many of these tax abatements is actually the inflation of land values, which is counterproductive in the development process. If say an apartment developer were to factor tax abatement into their pro forma, they would have more money in that pro forma to potentially pay more money for the land and thereby be able to command that scarce resource. But at the same time, by inflating that transaction value, you're actually ramping up the cost of land across that particular area of development and making it harder for others who do not receive tax abatements to be able to compete effectively with them. We've seen that type of dynamic occur in DeKalb County, and it makes it harder for the next person to come along, not to mention the fact that where you have one business that has one advantage and the other doesn't, there will continue to operate at a competitive disadvantage. We really want to focus at ACCG on businesses and development that is driven not by strategic economic development efforts to bring new jobs to Georgia and to our community, but instead those developments that follow on as a consequence, new housing, new retail, that are respending the dollars that the new basic industry brings, and that those are the areas where we can offset the concessions that we make for new basic industry and ensure that we can pay for the public services that are needed in order to support them. So when you're looking at retail or housing, those investment decisions are based upon the strength of the local market, not on incentives that may be offered by another place in another market. They're locally driven. And so inherently those businesses are not primarily driven by incentive, but instead by the local market strength, which is generated by strategic economic development for new basic industry. So we would like you to consider restrictions and giving us standing merely a seat at the table for those business, for housing and for retail, so that we can continue to participate in that process and keep the virtuous cycle going. So thanks very much.
Appreciate your input. Questions from the committee? Chair recognizes Chairman Alden.
I have tried to understand, and I think I'm getting different answers, whether or not the county commission has the right to remove a development authority depends on how the local statute is created. Am I right or wrong about that?
Go ahead.
I'm not familiar with anything in state statute. There may be, I know we have some local constitutional amendments that create development authorities. They may have something special.
No,
as
the
far as
statute that creates the development authorities.
I'm not aware of anything in there that gives the commissioners the right to remove them once they're appointed.
When we say that the county commission has authority over development authorities, I just don't think that's true if they can't remove somebody.
Right. That under the state law, there is no removal authority outlined, but there may be some cases in local constitutional amendment.
I believe there is a process if there's something that's going on unethical on the board for the governor maybe to remove, but not.
I wasn't thinking about that. I wasn't using that example of misconduct. If a person is very ill and not able to function anyway for a long period of time, he or she is not removable. And that's an issue that I think comes up in a variety of different ways.
But more importantly, local governing authorities don't have jurisdiction over members of boards that are appointed by other governing authorities, notwithstanding the fact that they can nevertheless have their taxes abated by those authorities.
So if Fulton County Development Authority had a person appointed by the Atlanta school system to be on its board, the Fulton County commissions would not have any authority to remove the Atlanta school board member. Is that what you
Or if
just
the
said?
abatement occurred by the city of Atlanta, Fulton County taxpayers would not have any recourse against those board members who abated the Fulton County's taxes.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Senator Parent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both. So Commissioner Rader, you mentioned, I'm familiar with the pilot payments. And then this, but my question is about, you mentioned administrative payments used as well. I think I can remember one example, but I was wondering if you could flesh that out a little bit, because we're just going
Sure.
quickly over that, and
The-
I'm not sure what that
The
is.
stream of payments is all structured through a contract between the development authority and the business with whom they're doing business. So there's one side of the house that is focused on the valuation for tax purposes, and you've heard a lot of presentation on that. But then there is a contract between the development authority and the private business that structures that bonds for title transaction. And that can include a series of payments, either, that 0.8% type of a administrative payment, or payments in other amounts. Again, in one particular case, we saw it split down the middle. So that's all a result of a contract that is solely between the development authority and the development. So really, in that particular side of the house, the sky's the limit.
So are those different than pilot payments in lieu of taxes? Or are they the same thing?
Yes, no, they're the same thing. I mean,
Okay.
it's generally considered payments in lieu of taxes, but they are structured through that contract.
So I think there's different uses, right? So there's the administrative side to run costs running a development authority. There can be, and you all talked about that earlier, but I think the 1/8 of 1%, there's basically to recoup some of the administrative costs to continue to run your development authority. What I was referring to earlier, when we talk about pilots, is sometimes they can be taken to sort of off, because when you're using a use of RUC, it's 100%, like it was said earlier, that ownership remains with the authority. There is no leasehold interest, right? So there's no taxes. And so a way to sort of achieve what you get under a leasehold interest, where you do get some tax revenue, is to instead use a payment in lieu of tax to recoup some of the loss. And so that's what I was referring to, is if you're using a payment in lieu of tax, not to support the development authority, but to help pay for some of the loss in ad valorem taxes from a local government. Should there be something in place that makes that sort of even across the board and doesn't allow one local government to sort of recoup some or all of its loss without doing the same for the other local governments?
Right. But again, those are all dependent upon the structure of that contract. Another feature, as we've seen, is where the local government, say a municipality, will want to see extra public amenities developed, new parks, better streetscapes, new streets cut through, that type of a thing. The developer, through the Georgia impact fees, statute, is not required to make those improvements, and in fact is protected from being required to make them. But a development authority can then work with the developer and say, well, we'll pay for those improvements. You need to make them, but we'll pay for the improvements through additional tax abatement for you, and therefore you'll be held harmless from a financial perspective. That would, I wouldn't object to that if it were only the city's revenues, but the problem is that they take school board and county revenues in order to do so, because in most cases, city tax revenues are a very small fraction of the total tax bill, and where the money is with the school taxes and the county taxes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee?
Earlier.
Very good.
Thanks for being here, Clint. You and I have talked about this. We had a meeting last week about it. And Commissioner, I don't think we've met, but I've met with some of my other colleagues in North Georgia that know you, and they speak highly of you. maybe I'm wrong, but it appears to me like you're trying to get legal standing at the validation hearing. Earlier, Ed Wall used the term sure enough lawyer. If you have those sure enough lawyers making $500 an hour, is that a fair number? And they spend months working on these deals with these prospects and these developers. You spend $100,000 pretty quick on legal fees and accountants and bond counsels and all. Why would you want to wait till basically the ninth inning of the game to come in and protest it at a validation hearing? That's when the bonds are about to be sold, if I'm not mistaken. Why would you not want to be on the earlier end of the negotiations with those development authorities? So if there is a tweak, it may not be all or nothing. It may be a small issue that the county has with the city DDA, and it's something you can work out early.
Sure.
And you could save a whole lot of money.
Sure.
It sounds like you have a problem in DeKalb County. I haven't heard this anywhere else,
Well,
this in the whole state, until
the
this
focus on
committee came
bond
up.
validation in this particular case is twofold. First of all, this is in a different statute, and it does not affect the Development Authorities Act. And we've heard that people don't want to, quote, open up the Development Authorities Act.
Sure.
So that's one of the reasons that we chose to focus on the validation process. You could also change development authorities and require, for instance, that development authorities negotiate intergovernmental agreements between taxing authorities prior to their exercise of their right to hold property. And that certainly would be an effective way to build everybody at the table. And there could potentially be a mechanism by which there would be a penalty if a taxing authority, held out and didn't, held themselves apart from that process, so that you'd want to bring them to the table, come to an agreement, and then use that agreement in order to structure the use of the very important tool. So that's one way to go, but it would require actual amendment of the Development Authorities Law. So the idea behind going to the validation process was that if there is that threshold or that, that has to be passed over, and that you're going to have to face that there, then that would compel those parties to similarly negotiate in advance so that they would enter into agreement that they would not oppose the validation of bonds that were consistent with a pre-negotiated strategy.
Yeah, and I think I followed all of that and I understand it, except if you have a prospect that wants to remain anonymous, how are you going to protect their identity? How are you going to protect that deal if you have a commissioner or a group of commissioners or city council members or school board members that go out and start talking, and before you know it, it's on social media that you're about to recruit aerospace manufacturer to North Georgia, and here's the deal that's being offered. Now,
And
South
that's why I
Carolina is
think
trying to recruit them. They
And that's
found
why
out
we're
what the
focused
deal is.
more on, sort of the general parameters, whether or not you use usufruct or
Right.
estate for years, whether or not you finance local public amenities, or whether or not the entire benefit goes to the development, whether or not you limit or restrict those pilot payments that are contractually designated to the local development authority. So you can set up those rules without any reference to a particular subject or a particular project. And if you pre-negotiate those, then provided everyone abides by the rules that they've agreed to, there wouldn't be a challenge to the validation because it would have already been addressed.
I've been involved with some pretty difficult loss negotiations, service delivery strategy negotiations. Now you have T-SPLOS negotiations that are going on. And I know how cities and counties come together at times and then they conflict a lot of other times. Another scenario is if you have a city that overlaps into two or more counties, they could play politics and play games with this process as well. You're not worried about that in your scenario here.
Well, again, if y'all would want to focus the requirement for collaboration more narrowly on taxing authorities and the development authorities that have the power to abate those taxes, I think that you certainly, would have that prerogative within your recommendations to suggest that particular change. Again, what we were trying to do is to use a general mechanism that would bring people to the table. they can still, I mean, even without this statutory standing, entities can in fact go ahead and apply. It's just that it doesn't give you the advantage of having folks know that they need to collaborate in advance. So either through the Development Authority statute or through the bond validation authority or the bond validation statute, imposing this requirement to collaborate in advance of a particular project, I think is what we're really focused on, and to try to recognize that that new basic industry should be the focus of this type of an incentive, and not local serving, service demanding activities such as housing or retail in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Senator Rhett Butler. No, Rhett, better known as Doc.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a question, and Ed might be able to chime in on it because he's been around. Have you ever seen a person removed from a development authority, or any reason that a person should be removed from a development authority after being appointed during their tenure?
I am aware of certain development authority members that, for instance, have taken a contract representing another, jurisdiction that has, a development authority. So, there is an arguable overlap of their responsibilities there. I have also seen, perhaps it's a more political situation to where a member of a governing authority was on a development authority and they refused to concede their seat after they had, lost an election, so that the governing authority wasn't represented on the development authority as was initially intended. So there can be other ways. I believe that there's a provision in the Development Authority Act that, sort of not negates, but moderates, general conflict of interest as it relates to development authorities and their members, because often members of the development authority are prominent and unique and essential people within the community. So if you're a banker or something like that, maybe you don't want them to have to recuse themselves from every deal because they're the only bank in town.
Over the year, with the 159 counties and 400 something cities, those would probably be the exception, or?
Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't suggest that, development authority in any way generally acting that way.
Thank you, Senator. Any other members of the committee have questions? Again, we appreciate your input. I recognize the challenge. Just in closing, have you experienced in DeKalb County concerns between development authorities and it negatively impacting the county?
Well, as a result of some of the, debate over the transactions, we see that people are getting a little bit more careful about that process as they come to light. The public generally, becomes more aware, but, again, because this is a very complex area, back to, the Yazoo land fraud, it's very difficult for the public to understand, the import of these agencies and exactly what they do. And in fact, we've seen jurisdictions actually reject redevelopment powers, which gives them the ability to use tax allocation districts, which have all sorts of safeguards built into them. And then the jurisdiction just went back and impaneled their development authority, which had none of those safeguards in it. And so, it's just, I think that it's important to allow those that are the stewards of these tax revenues to be able to represent their constituents to ensure the integrity of those revenues. Because otherwise, at some level, we're going to have to tax someone else to make up the taxes that are foregone within an inappropriate abatement.
Thank you for your input. We appreciate it. Again, this is a process and we're still early in the process, but we're making progress.
Thank you.
We're going to move quickly now. Miss Angela Payne with the Georgia School Board, Angela, with Georgia School Board Association. Again, another entity that is impacted by decisions made by development authorities. And downtown development.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for inviting us. And thank you, Mr. Wall, for including school boards and school districts in your discussion about this process. I'm Angela Palm. I'm the Director of Policy and Legislative Services for the Georgia School Boards Association. And since school boards are not very much of an integral part of this process, this is not a process that I have known much about. So it's been interesting to learn. In thinking about what I wanted to say to you that would be meaningful today, I was Googling development authorities in Georgia to try to learn more about it and also learn what the fiscal impact is. I did know about GASB 77, so I knew that it would be in the audits. And that was actually the only place that I could find any specific information about the impact of the decisions that were being made on a school district. And the only way to know any statewide impact was to sit there and go through each audit individually. And I think that's ridiculous. From a public policy aspect, I agree with ACCG. We had not talked about what we were going to say, but I agree with them. There should be a database. Everybody somebody knows what it is. And the idea that, you can go to the county or the city and ask, why should you have to do that? There should be a database where the information is entered in a uniform manner. If you do go to any audits to look at the GASB 77 statements, it's in the notes, by the way, you'll find that they're discussed very differently. Now, it may be just a factor of being a different kind of deal, but I think that more transparency around this would be very helpful to the public and also to other governmental entities or people who are not part of the structure of the deal. Secondly, in thinking about this, I always think that we should look back at work that has previously been done around a topic and see what do we do with it. In 2013, the Department of Audits did a performance audit on development authorities, and the report contained several recommendations. One of them was around ethics, which House Bill 923, 9 years later, got done. Another recommendation in that audit was to ensure that the members of the authorities get their required training. At our last meeting, DCA gave you some handouts, and one of them, the one with the tables in it, table 3 showed that 77% of the members got their required training. I don't know if that's a typical number, if that's high or if it's low. So I would suggest asking for more information around that, because that means almost a quarter of the members are not did not, at least in that year, get their required training. And it's vital that people do get training and know what the rules are around what they're doing. I don't know what their training includes, but since we require it, there should be some kind of enforcement mechanism if they're not getting it. Are the same people not getting it every year? So I would look into that aspect of it. And it's important also when you're looking at the development authority, the decisions, the taxing decisions, and whatever is being structured, that it also be recorded correctly in the property tax digest. Because the tax digest is the core of the calculation for equalization and the 5 mil deductions in QBE. And so it's important for both the state and the local school districts that be correct. If it's not correct, the state could be paying too much money to some district or not paying enough. It could go either way. So that's another thing. Communication is often an issue. Whenever you see something that becomes controversial, it almost always comes down to there is a need for better communication and understanding of each other's roles in a process. And I like ACG's idea of notice to the governmental authorities. And I would also say, since school boards have not been part of this process, having a school district representative on a development authority would be very helpful. One person on the authority is not going to kill a deal. They wouldn't be able to stop anything, but you would have somebody on there who could give information on the possible impact to a school district, and would also have somebody who understands what's happening and could then explain it to the others at the appropriate time when the information can be shared. And so I think that that should be considered. I know that there are a few, or I've been told that there are a few that do have somebody from the school district, probably the superintendent on it, but I think that would be another one. Finally, we support Representative Oliver's efforts previously to provide standing on the bond validation. As Senator Gooch pointed out, that's late to have to make an objection, but if you have no other place in which you are part of the process, you take what you can get. And if that's the only place that we can be willing to insert school boards in the cities and counties to formally be able to part of this and to have an impact, then we need to do that. The comments earlier about there's informal communication because they go have breakfast at the cafe and there's the diner. We got to be careful about that as a public policy idea because it sounds like a violation of the Open Meetings Act. Majority of them are sitting there at breakfast talking about business. It's a meeting. So that's all I wanted to present to you. Thank you for your time. If I can answer any questions, I'll be glad to.
Questions from the committee? Questions from the committee? Are you familiar, Ms. Palm, with how many development authorities include a school board member? Do you know?
I don't know. I only know that some do because of another study committee that Senator Jack Hill did around it. And at that study committee, there were actually some senators who were on it that said that their development authority had somebody from the school
had a
district.
representative from the school board on there. Okay, that might be a good question for us to understand the representation. I recognize the impact of the development authorities and their decisions of the community, including our schools. And if indeed tax abatements are provided, then the school systems have to find the revenue source to make up for that. And the position of ACCG was that becomes especially of concern where there's housing or retail. Is that something that the school boards share a concern on?
Yes, housing in particular, whenever a new company comes in, while they welcome the economic development and the growth and the strength of their community, that also means more than likely more kids are coming in and other infrastructure would have to be put into place. And so they would have to hire more teachers, possibly capital outlay would have to be accounted for in there if they need additional facilities in order to do that. And so just like with zoning decisions, that definitely comes up.
Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your willingness to be here. We're now going to recognize Sadie Krasowski. Did I, as Stephen Colbert would say, did I correctly mispronounce your name? Okay, thank you. Now you're going to have to correct me. I apologize. Ms. Krasowski.
Krozik.
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 Ah,
It helps if you don't see it spelled. Yeah.
you bet. You're right. Krozik. Thank you. And Ms. Krozik is with Georgia Municipal Association. We welcome your input.
Yes, thank you. And I'm going to also be speaking on behalf of the Georgia Downtown Association, which is an association of downtowns throughout the state. And so what I wanted to speak to today primarily is downtown development authorities, which is a little different than industrial development authorities. One of the complexities with the DDA, as Dan mentioned, they focus on a boundary that is their district, typically the central business district of a city. And there are requirements that board members have an interest, an economic interest within those boundaries. And so it is appointed by the city commission or city council who sits on it, but it's a different representation from the community than a typical industrial development authority. So, and since we're looking at both of those in the study committee, just wanted to point that out. And with DDAs across the state, we do have 537 cities throughout the state of Georgia. It's a little higher number than we've been saying, and all of them could activate and have a downtown development authority if they defined a boundary as a downtown and put people on that authority. So that's a lot more that could be out there. It's not how many are out there. And downtown development authorities could be established in two ways. One, constitutional, which is more common, or statutory. And so when they are statutory downtown development authorities, they can have differing government or governing policies than what is standard in constitutional. So those are more rare. but the terms, what qualifies a board member can vary when they were established by statutory. So just wanted to give some of that background. But generally, DDAs are not using tax abatements in this traditional manner that has been presented so far, which is establishing the estate in years or a usufruct. Typically, the way that DDAs are doing economic development projects is they're identifying properties or parcels that are not moving or active in the private market. They're either owned by city-owned already, and the city through an intergovernmental agreement can authorize the DDA to market and sell or redevelop that property. So it would be off the tax rolls, and kind of their role is to get it back into the private market. Or they are acquiring property that is not, it's too risky and not attractive to the private developers to take on because there may be issues with the property, maybe location. And so a DDA can come in, acquire that property, and then recruit a potential developer or redevelop it themselves to put back on the tax rolls as a private business eventually, or use the rent roll to fund what they're doing as a DDA. But the point of all of that is to accomplish their mission for downtown redevelopment and within their boundaries. And so one example I wanted to give, my background before I was the GMA, I was in a local city, Monroe, Georgia, doing downtown development for 9 years. And so we used our DDA to activate a couple of projects. One was a former gas station that was a used car dealership and had environmental issues. It was right off of our main corridor in downtown. So a potentially great location, but a very risky property for the private market because of the environmental issues and its history. So DDA entered into an agreement to purchase that property and assemble a smaller parcel next to it that had a condemned building on it, put those together and go through the remediation process, put it into the brownfield program, and then sold it to the final developer and recouped our costs there. So the final developer developed it into a restaurant. So we bought the property for around $100,000 and $250,000. We held it, paid for the environmentals, and then they bought the property from us for $300,000, which covered our cost in, and put a $700,000 construction project on the property. So today it's worth $1 million as a project, but it never would have moved in the private market because even us holding it and purchasing it took over 2 years because of the risk involved and just the process that it had to go through. So it's small scale, and that's an example. And during the time when we held it, it was not a taxable property. But that's a little out of the box of what we've been hearing so far as the typical structure. But I wanted to share it with you because that is a common practice for how smaller DDAs are engaging in the redevelopment work for their communities with economic development. We also do the required training. It's 8 hours required training. I know there's been some questions about that for within the first year of sitting on the development authority. GMA actually facilitates a lot of that training in partnership with Carl Vinson Institute at the University of Georgia, and we hold those trainings throughout the year. We do a DDA basic training that's 8 hours and an advanced training that kind of will go into some higher levels of how to do this development, and both of those count and qualify as your required training. I also just came back from the Georgia Downtown Association conference, which is also additional training that we offer to professionals and board members that are in this work of downtown development. So we are developing a number of tools to equip people to do this work well, but just be happy to answer any other questions you might have related to downtown development authorities.
Questions from the committee? Questions from the committee? Senator Parent, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
I'm trying to make sure I understand the training requirement. Is it that you have to do the basic or the 8 hours within the first year after being appointed?
First 12 months, yes.
First 12
what
months.
it is my understanding of.
And the advance isn't required?
It is not.
So you don't have to do any training before you get appointed?
No.
Thank you.
How is that training reported, and how are you sure that your development authority, downtown development authority members?
The DC, the annual reporting to the Department of Community Affairs is where you would record who gets that training. And so when they go, our practice when I was in the position locally was they shared their certificate from the training. We know that they went and we submit that to the DCA.
In our prior meeting with the input from the Department of Community Affairs, we recognize that not all members of development authorities or downtown development authorities are receiving it and not, or either that or they're not reporting it. So we got a bit of an issue there. Let me go back and make sure I understand. You do not use either traditionally estate for years abatement or use of in your downtown development authorities. Is that correct?
I have not in my experience, nor do I know of others across the state, but I'm sure there are, and they have the ability to. That is not a common practice.
Again, I think we've had some issues in the metropolitan counties where cities have used use of as a tool to develop, to do downtown development. Is that, I don't know, is that something you can speak to?
I can't speak to the, I'm sure that has happened. That makes sense to me, but the ones I'm speaking to are generally the rest of Georgia.
So I would acknowledge the fact that the majority of our cities are smaller communities that are working to redevelop areas that would serve the community in a greater need. But okay, I just was concerned that you say that it hadn't been used, but yet my concern is that it may be used by some downtown development authority.
Yes, that's what I was trying to communicate. It's not a common practice, but yes, it can be and has been used by some.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Very good. Thank you. We appreciate your input and your patience. And thank you for coming up from Macon this morning. Our last input is from Mr. Bill Doris. Bill, are you available? Now, Bill is an attorney as well with Kilpatrick, Townsend, and Stockton. He is here today representing the Associated General Contractors of Georgia and a unique, what he perceives as a unique contractor lien rights issue that is a part of the Development Authority toolbox. Is that a fair statement?
It is, Senator Burns.
All right, please share with us your input, Bill. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I think I got nominated to come here on behalf of the AGC of Georgia because I was the only one that wanted to say words like usufruct in public.
So you can even say.
But as Mr. Wall described, the financing or how tax abatement is achieved with the title moving from the developer into the development authority in return for a lease back to the developer, where that lease is one of two types, which is an estate for years, or as he suggested, the less common is a usufruct, where then there is no taxation for some set period of time. It is that second that we have a concern about and have run into some problems. Now, we don't have a problem with tax abatement. As needless to say, Associated General Contractors likes to see development and progress and growth of business in Georgia. But what happens with lien rights is that where title then is in a public body, there are no lien rights against the development authority. And then where you have a lease that is a usufruct interest, there are no lien rights there because usufruct is defined as not being subject to levy or sale. So we have had members run into problems in those situations because unfortunately, there are times even on these tax abatement projects where developers run into trouble and don't pay their architects, their engineers, the contractor, and then the subcontractors don't get paid. And those parties need lien rights in those situations. And we think a fairly straightforward solution is to simply provide that where you have a lessee, which is another way of saying the developer that now has a usufruct lease, that usufruct lease interest is subject to the mechanics lien statute and is subject to levy and sell pursuant to it. So all that does is that does not change anything for the development authority. That does not change the tax abatement. It just gives those architects, engineers, subcontractors, and contractors working on the job and providing goods and services to that job to at least have some way to try to get paid if there's a hiccup in the project and the developer stops paying them. So that's a very narrow issue, but for our members who are doing work on these projects, very important.
Thank you for your input. Chair recognizes Chairman Alban.
That does sound like it could be an easy legislative fix. Two questions. Are you aware of any legal barriers to doing that I can't think of? And secondly, you're not asking for a lien against the development authority or the county or the city or anybody else. It's only against the developer.
The second part of your question first, no, we're not asking for a lien against the public interest or public body at
No
all.
backup by the public interest. It's a developer or nobody
Correct.
else.
And number two, we've looked at it. We don't think that there are any constitutional or other legal issues, best we can tell, with what we've proposed.
Thank you.
Other questions of the committee? I'm sorry, Senator Parent?
Thank you.
No.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure my notes are correct. Trying to write, hard to keep up with the, pace of speech, right? So you mentioned that it would be, we could use the mechanics lien to accomplish this?
That's correct.
Okay.
Correct.
But you would have to say that I write down solution where have a lessee a usufruct lease, the interest could be subject to the mechanics lien.
It's even more specifically where you have a usufruct interest in a lease that is then subject, where the lessee is then subject to getting the title back. In other words, that then makes it only in these instances, because what happens is at the end of the 5 years or 10 years, the developer gets the title back. So we really are refining it to that those are then subject to, those usufruct interests are subject to the mechanics lien statute and to levy and sell. And I'd be happy to send proposed language if that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you for your input. Again, you've experienced this problem in Georgia where contractors or developers have not honored their contracts and paid subcontractors and engineers and architects. Is that true?
That is correct.
And again, is it frequent? Is it infrequent? Is it substantive? It doesn't matter, but it just from a relative component that says what's the scope of the challenge?
We know of a few occasions, but they're significant. And we fear that there are other occasions where the contractor just walks away because it doesn't really have a remedy.
Thank you.
So I can't say how frequent it is, but it's significant in the ones.
But it's only associated where you have the usufruct lease approach toward abatement. Is that correct?
That's correct. And even if that's 10 or 20%, least it's a lot of, that's a lot of it.
Any other questions of the committee? I appreciate Mr. Dorris being here. Mr. Stuart Morelli is here, who is the legislative counsel to the committee. So perhaps you can share some of your insights with Mr. Morelli. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're grateful for your input. Well, the good news is we didn't stay till dark. That's a start. Go with 12:30. Let me say first, thank you to those of you who suffered and enjoyed the opportunity to visit with us this morning. Thank you for your interest and your desire to make Georgia a better place. Our goal is to improve the economic health of Georgia. And we recognize that their economic goal and engines are there, and we recognize the contributions of development authorities and downtown development authorities. So we're here to support that. For the committee, our next meeting will be in Savannah. Come south, a little closer to where I live. It'll be September the 13th. Our host for that meeting is the Savannah Economic Development Authority. We appreciate Trip Tollison and his folks who are going to host us down there. We're going to have our meeting at 2 p.m. September the 13th at the Savannah Economic Development Authority building on Drayton Street. Broughton Street in Savannah. There will be electronic access. We will have Zoom available. And we'll also get the committee details on accommodations and arrangements for that if you choose to join us physically, and I hope you will. Does the committee have any other input prior to adjournment? See none, I have a motion to adjourn. I have a motion. Have a second. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Meeting's adjourned.